was previously elected as DA in the Montrose-based 7th Judicial District, and I'll let him give you a little bit more background about himself.
Sure, thank you, Katie. Just briefly, let's get to these guys. Yeah, I was a district attorney in the early 2000s over on the Western Slope, and then I went to work in the Attorney General's office, running the section there. Prior to government service, I had a private law firm in Gunnison. In this job since 2010 as the director of Colorado District Attorney's Council. We have both Republican and Democratic district attorneys throughout the state. There are 22 DAs. My job really is to be a voice for them at the Capitol and to help with trainings and prosecutors all around the state. So that's enough about me.
All right.
We should get to these folks.
We'll kick it off with a coin toss to decide who will go first. So just if either of you wanted to hold it.
I do have a question. What is he video taping it for?
Heads it is.
So anyone can. We're also taping it. This is on Facebook Live right now.
I'm your lady.
So we're going to start with just kind of an introductory opportunity for both candidates. They'll each have a couple of minutes, 2 minutes to do this. So as an opening, please introduce yourselves, detail your prosecutorial experience, qualifies you to address Boulder County's dynamic issues, for example, cannabis, opioids, growing population, as opposed to the numbers in law enforcement, conflicts with federal and local jurisdictions, recidivism, juvenile system, basically anything and everything in 2 minutes for an opening statement.
All right, no problem. Well,
3 minutes. You can
3 minutes. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much, Tom, for being here and being the moderator. This is actually a different experience for me. I'm sitting next to Tom, and he's not running around like this all the time, trying to make sure that some of the bills that are going on now at the Capitol don't go some crazy direction. So it's very good to see you in much more of a calm state, Tom, and thanks for being here. And thanks for all of you being here. I really appreciate your time. My name is Mike Foote, and I've been very honored to have served Boulder County since 2004. I've been a deputy district attorney in the Boulder County District Attorney's Office since 2004. And I've also been a state representative representing the eastern part of Boulder County since 2012. I know many of you. I appreciate you coming out. And I think many of you know me because I've been someone who's been out here in Boulder County fighting for progressive candidates and progressive causes for the better part of a decade. I'm very happy to have done so. I think we've accomplished some good things here in Boulder County and at the state for progressive causes. I've been on the front lines down in the legislature for making sure that we increase gun safety, for example, and fighting for background checks, fighting for making sure that we don't have weapons in the hands of domestic violence offenders, fighting for magazine restrictions, and the recent red flag law that unfortunately didn't pass the Senate, but is a very good bill. And I've been very proud to have the support of many of the folks that I fought beside down at the Capitol with the Moms Demand Action Group and others that have been at the Capitol every day, or virtually every day, trying to make sure that we have better gun safety laws there. And I'll take that kind of experience with me as your district attorney here in Boulder County. The same goes for immigration issues. Since 2013, I've been at the Capitol fighting for immigration issues, fighting for our immigrant community. Driver's license program, making sure to have actually a viable driver's license program when Republicans have tried to defund it, and also fighting on behalf of the immigrant community against anti-sanctuary city policies. In other words, I was fighting on behalf of sanctuary city policies before that was even really a term, starting in 2013. And again, I'm very happy to tell you that there's leaders of the immigrant community that I'm with here, or that are with me in this campaign because they know the work that I've done and that I'll continue to do as your district attorney. And finally, I'll mention environmental protection because that's been a big issue that I've also fought for down at the Capitol. Making sure to stand up to the oil and gas industry, making sure to work on climate change issues, making sure to fight for renewable energy. All of those things are passions of mine, and it's not just because I'm trying to check a box and say I'm going to do this bill and do this bill and do that bill. I think you can see from what I've done and what I've emphasized, these are passions of mine. And those are the same passions I'll take with me to the district attorney's office on your behalf. There's a lot of good things that we've done in the Boulder DA's office over the last several years, over the last 10 years, really 14 years since I started there. And there's also some good things we've done at the state as well to make sure that we reform the criminal justice system. We've done more diversion in the Boulder District Attorney's office. We've done more restorative justice. A lot of that is because of state funding, and I'm happy to say that we've been able to support that. And we've done a lot of good state reforms, from juvenile justice to, and I don't know what that means with
That's
your hand.
fine. I'll do this for stop.
Okay. So anyway, we'll get into some of those criminal justice reforms in just a moment, I'm sure. And again, I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm going to say Mike and Michael. These are both good friends of mine, so it's kind of awkward to be in the middle, but Michael.
Good afternoon. I really appreciate your being here. Even if I were not your district attorney and a candidate for this office, I would tell you that this is an incredibly important office. It has an impact on thousands of lives every single year. So we're here today to talk about the district attorney's office. It is an office of 87 outstanding women and men who work on public safety and criminal justice reform. So when you think about the office, think about leadership experience, vision for the future, and a proven track record of criminal justice reform. I've been a leader in 3 large prosecutors' offices, but I became a prosecutor because of the mission of doing justice. That's why I went to the Manhattan DA's office out of law school. I served there for 12 years. I supervised 45 prosecutors working on sex assault and human trafficking cases, reaching out to the immigrant communities in New York City to develop trust so victims could come forward and be supported and justice could be done in those cases. Eventually, I was put in charge of the entire day-to-day operations of the office of 1,300 people while still trying major cases. So knowing what it takes to be a leader, to inspire people, support people, and help them do great work for the community. My wife, Antonia, and I moved to Boulder to start a wrongful conviction project on a federal grant to look for people who were sitting in a Colorado state prison like Robert Dewey, who was 100% innocent. He had been in a state prison for 17 years here in Colorado before that project started. We moved to Boulder for that project. The project led to his exoneration as well as the successful identification, arrest, and conviction of the actual killer who's now in state prison. From there, I was put in charge of the criminal justice section for the Attorney General's office, the office that has jurisdiction over most environmental crimes committed in Colorado. So I had the honor of overseeing the Environmental Crimes Unit, successfully prosecuting corporate polluters and environmental crimes all around the state of Colorado, and the Financial Fraud Unit, where integrity really matters. You want to make sure fraudsters don't get away with pulling scams on them. And human trafficking and special prosecutions all around the state. And I spent the last 5 years running the day-to-day operations and meeting the staff at the office in Boulder. The staff twice the size with twice the caseload of our staff in Boulder. But no greater honor in my career than becoming your district attorney, our district attorney, the district attorney for the community in which my family and I lived our entire career. We have an opportunity to build off the great foundation that Dan Garnett and the staff, some of whom are here today, and I really appreciate that, have built into place. So from that foundation, we could start programs like a mental health diversion program that we just launched to take low-level offenders out of the jail prior to any charges being filed and connect them with treatment providers in the community to give them the help and the treatment they need instead of just cycling in and out of the criminal justice system, like Brent. Brent was a guy that I met at the homeless shelter in South Boulder recently. Brent's been arrested 35 times in the last 5 years. We can and must do better. This program is going to allow us to do that. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, you can stay standing for the coin toss. You go next on the first question after the intro. So we'll have 2 minutes to answer this one. And just a reminder, these questions are not mine. I was able to see them yesterday, and I'll put comments on editing. They're not my questions.
We haven't seen the question.
You have not seen the questions. So first question. You will be one of potentially 22 elected DAs in the state. How do you balance your role locally against your role with your 21 colleagues in framing statewide policy while maintaining loyalty to Boulder's values?
It's a great question. Thank you. I have a strong working relationship. Sure. Sorry.
You will be one of 22 elected district attorneys in the state if elected. How do you balance your role locally against your role with your 21 colleagues in forming statewide policy while still maintaining your loyalty to Boulder's values?
I have strong working relationships with many of the district attorneys around the state of Colorado, which is why they've endorsed my campaign to continue as your district attorney. Those relationships are particularly important when we talk about legislation and how to get legislation passed. When we talk about different priorities and issues, where I can take to them the work we're doing here in Boulder, such as the mental health diversion program and the first DA conviction integrity unit that has started in the state of Colorado under my watch. which is a program designed to make sure that if people are actually innocent, they've been wrongfully convicted in Colorado, in Boulder, that we have a process that is effective, just, and transparent in partnership with the Boulder Public Defender's Office to go back and look at those cases to make sure no one was wrongfully convicted. So those are the programs that I share with my colleagues from around the state. Those relationships matter, and I've earned their respect over the years. In fact, when we first came out to Colorado, I had to travel the entire state, earning their trust and respect for that wrongful conviction project, so that they would give us access to their case files. And I started with Stan Garnett and traveled through the entire state of Colorado. All 22 of the electeds at that time gave us complete, unfettered access to the case files. Those partnerships are particularly important. Being true to Boulder and representing Boulder's interests is something I would do, and it's something I've done over the years. So, for example, for the last several years, Stan Garnett and I had been chosen as the 2 representatives for the state of Colorado on the National DA Board. And we were what I would call the new guard, and there was a fair amount of prosecutors there who were the old school. And we would always represent our progressive vision for prosecution. And that's what I continue to do as a member of the statewide District Attorney's Council. For the last several years, they had me serve as the Executive Vice President for the statewide District Attorney's Council, a role that I took very seriously while never forgetting the people that I represent. As Boulder's District Attorney, I will use our programs, the success we have here, to bring it statewide. So talking today to the defense bar about that very issue. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. First of all, I have worked very well with the district attorneys around the state, particularly as part of my legislative role, and I'll continue to do so as your elected district attorney here in Boulder County. I'll give you actually a couple of quick examples. Just this year, there was a bill that I ran regarding financial fraud. It was something where the Attorney General's office and then district attorneys around the state were having some difficulties coming together on it. There was a particularly sticky issue with jurisdiction. And I sat down with members of the Attorney General's office and Republican DAs and came to a good resolution. And that's because they, of course, understood that I knew where we were coming from, what a good resolution was, and I was able to be an honest broker and help people come together. And we did that still within the spirit of the bill. And I'll give you another example. And this is something where I should preface this by saying that, of course, the Boulder office interests always come first. You have to take care of home first. You have to make sure that you have a strong office first, your prosecutors are doing a great job, and you're present every single day. But there are sticky issues that need to be addressed at the state. I'll give you a quick example. You may remember a very tragic case that happened in 2011 where a woman who was just coming back from her last well baby check, was 8.5 months pregnant, got hit by a drunk driver, and she miscarried. There was nothing in the law to address that loss. That offender was not able to be held accountable for that particular loss. There was a gap in the law. And so when I went to the legislature the very next year, I was able to put something in law that threaded the needle between accountability for the offender and also make sure that a woman's right to choose was protected. And by the way, we were actually able to put the last nail in the coffin of all the personhood initiatives as a result of that bill. So that's the kind of creativity I think we need to bring to this position to solve problems that we have. There are a lot of sticky problems, criminal justice reform issues that take some outside-of-the-box thinking, some good thinking, and some creative thinking. And that's the kind of skills and experience that I'll bring as your district attorney here in Boulder County.
Great. So, Mike, you'll have the next question, the opportunity to come first. One of you is about to undertake managing an office of 80-plus people, managing a local taxpayer-funded budget of more than $6 million. What qualifies for you for this, and how will you handle it?
Well, I think this kind of goes into part of what I said before, which is that my first responsibility as district attorney is to be there at the office, be present, and always make sure we're taking care of first things first, taking care of home. And one of the most important aspects of that is making sure that we have good people in the right places. We all have worked for managers that somehow or another got promoted that weren't that good, unfortunately. We've all worked for good managers too, I think. I hope I can say that. And so just because someone's been promoted to a manager position doesn't mean that they're in the right spot at the right time and have the right skills. One of the main things that the district attorney must do is make sure that there are people in the right spot at the right time with the right skills. And certainly I'll be looking at that every single day, making sure that we're maximizing personnel, making sure that we're maximizing the duties of those managers, the people that are overseeing the day-to-day operations of the office, particularly those on the chief deputy level that are interacting with our deputy DAs every single day and making sure that they're doing the right thing. My responsibility is to be at the top, of course, as district attorney, and talk about my philosophies, talk about how we should run the office, and talk about, most importantly, what every single deputy district attorney should be doing every single day, which is doing the right thing and doing justice, and making sure that that is imparted every single day. And certainly, I will do that as a district attorney, and I will bring my experience as someone from the, thanks for doing that, by the way, that's helpful. My experience as being someone from the Boulder District Attorney's Office, knowing the players, knowing the system, and knowing how everything works, and making sure that the deputies do the right thing every day.
So Michael just asked me to repeat the question. Again, one of you is about to undertake managing an office of 80-plus people and managing a local taxpayer-funded budget of more than $6 million. What qualifies for you for this? Transposing those two words. I sat in 2 hours of traffic, so how do we handle this?
Think for a moment about the last boss you had. How many of you think leadership experience matters with a show of hands? Leadership experience matters with a show of hands. I would agree. I learned so much when I was supervising misdemeanor prosecutors about 15 years ago. And then going on to be put in charge of 45 sex crimes prosecutors. They're signaling for me to stop for a moment. I assume it's because of the train. Otherwise, this is really long. So I'm going to pick up again. I supervised 45 prosecutors. I was asked to join the executive staff of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in my 8th year as a prosecutor. There were 5 others on the executive staff. The next most junior person had been there 25 years. I'm so grateful that they gave me that responsibility, because I learned so much about being a leader and inspiring people and always acting with integrity. And coming out here, and 7 months after I arrived, being put in charge of the entire criminal justice section for the Attorney General's office. Every leadership position I've had has also involved overseeing a budget. So in Manhattan, I was in charge of a budget of $125 million. In Jeffco, for the last 5 years, a budget of $23 million. And now our budget of over $6 million. Those dollars really matter. And I'll give you a good example. We have a restorative justice and diversion program in the Boulder DA's office, and it's probably the thing that people ask me about the most in the community. That is almost entirely grant funded. So what that means is we hire and retain outstanding people who are experts in restorative justice and diversion, who know that if those grants were to evaporate, their jobs would go away. So knowing how to manage those funds and lead them and inspire them and ensure them that I'm going to help them, and that we're going to fight for every dollar. And we're going to work with the county commissioners to get permanent funding for a program that we should have as a permanent part of our county, because it's too valuable not to. Because so many people end up in the criminal justice system because they make bad mistakes and just need help getting back on the right track. So knowing how to lead and how to run a budget, you don't learn in a day. But it's never been more important than right now in our criminal justice to have that kind of leadership experience. We all know that from the jobs we've had in our own careers. Thank you.
So Michael, the next question will be yours to start with. The relationship between the DA's office and our county schools is critical. How will you establish a strong partnership to ensure that our children are safe from gun violence, bullying, and sexual harassment in Boulder County schools?
Such an important question, especially right now. So that work is already underway, and I've worked with schools throughout my career in New York, and as the person in charge of the Attorney General's criminal section, which has a program that's designed for people to make anonymous reports if they're being threatened or bullied in the schools, and that's a statewide program that we have now here in Colorado. Also in Jeffco and now in Boulder, I've been working very closely with the schools. And it's important because of this. I was interviewed on the radio a couple weeks ago, and I'm standing in my living room on a Saturday, and I'm on the phone being interviewed live, and the radio host strongly believes that we should have our teachers armed. And he starts asking me about this, and I say to him, no, I don't feel that way. I don't want my kids staring at a gun on their teacher's hip all day long. And if the teacher's locking the gun away, I don't want kids possibly getting their hands on it. And I've seen police officers who go through hundreds of hours of training every year make mistakes in stressful situations. So where are the teachers getting all this training from? And I get off the phone and my daughter says, what was that conversation about? And she's 10. That's heartbreaking that that's our existence right now. So I've been working very closely with the schools. I've gone to parent safety presentations put on by the St. Brandon Valley School District. I've been in Longmont schools, Lafayette schools. I was just up in Longmont the other day talking to high school kids about what they see and what dangers they face and the drug problems in their school. We need to have strong working relationships with the schools and law enforcement and the district attorney's office to bring a united front to these problems. Because our kids are being subject to bullying in a way that we never were. Social media allows for our kids to never leave school. They come home and they never unplug. So if they have Facebook or social media accounts of any kind, then bullying continues. So going out into the community and teaching kids how to protect themselves and teaching parents how to protect themselves. So for that reason, we started their innovative sexting program in Golden a few years ago. We had 250 kids who had been accused of sexting go through the program. 250 graduated, 0 reoffended, and none of them have their name on a single piece of paper in the criminal justice system. What you're saying, Ty.
Sorry, I was trying to be encouraging of a great plan.
Well, that's a good question, and the answer is actually I think we have a pretty good relationship with our schools right now. And I know this because I've worked with the schools. I've worked particularly with our school resource officers, particularly over the last year when I was doing juvenile prosecutions. And we have a good system. It can always be better. And actually the SROs are a little bit under the microscope right now, particularly from the state, because we want to make sure we have a good balanced system between those SROs that are providing school resource officers, that are providing safety for our kids, but also there are police presence in the school. So you have to be sensitive to that. We have to make sure that our school resource officers, for example, are not over-arresting. Where maybe back in the day, there would be a schoolyard fight between two kids that's broken up, no harm done really, except for maybe a suspension or the parents are told, etc. We have to make sure that the school resource officers don't go the extra mile and actually send them through the system if we can avoid it at all costs. And so I think, as I said, the school resource officers do a pretty good job in this regard, but we can always do better. One of the main aspects of school safety now, and this is no secret to anybody here, is making sure that we prevent gun violence. And as I said at the beginning, I've been a very strong advocate when it comes to preventing gun violence and for putting forth common sense gun safety bills and other types of bills. This has been a real passion of mine. All of us have people that we know in the schools. I personally have kids in the schools as well, the public schools in Lafayette. And so, of course, this is a passion of mine. Making sure, for example, that mental health professionals can disclose threatening information to schools if it comes out during the course of their treatment. That was a bill that I passed in 2015, that we really threaded the needle there to make sure that we have school safety. Making sure that we continue with school safety and gun violence bills, making them better, making sure that they pass, like the red flag bill that unfortunately didn't pass this last time around. But you need a strong district attorney that's going to go down to the Capitol, that understands the Capitol, understands what it takes to pass a bill, particularly a gun safety bill, and I'll do that. Oh, I got to stand.
Yeah, and I just got handed some questions that are somewhat corollaries to that last question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask these. You have both been supportive of SRO school resource officers. In the last few months, a quick Google search produces 2 unfortunate incidences of law enforcement weapons being fired near students. Question 1, is it wise to bring more law enforcement and more guns into schools? Question 2, do you support providing know your rights training to students if SROs are present at schools? And I can repeat that second one if you need me to after you do
Yeah,
the first
what was the
one.
first one again?
The first
More
one,
SROs?
is it wise to bring more law enforcement and more guns into schools?
Well, certainly not more guns into schools, I can tell you that. I mean, certainly the guns with teachers' bills have been those that I've helped kill at the legislature over the last 6 years. Very much opposed to that. I think that if there is to be weapons in schools, or if there are to be weapons in schools, it should be a trained school resource officer that has them. Now, this last year we debated giving more money from the state to school districts, particularly for SRO programs. And we came to the conclusion that we should fund training to make training better, and also for security programs and actual hardening of security in schools, but not more SROs. And the very reason was because people were very sensitive to the fact that you don't want to over-police a school. You don't want to have a huge police presence at a school. That's disconcerting to kids, particularly younger kids. So we want to have a good balance. I don't know exactly what the balance is for every school. There are plenty of schools here in Boulder County, and I don't want to speak for the schools. But I do know that we shouldn't be arming teachers. We should leave that to the professionals, which are the school resource officers, and do the best we possibly can with their training. What was the second question?
Part two, do you support providing Know Your Rights training to students if SROs are present at schools?
Of course. This is good training for students. It's good training for adults. And it's good training for the SROs. We want to make sure that the police always are upholding rights of kids and adults alike. And sometimes we all need to be reminded exactly what those are, and there's no harm in continuing to repeat those. So, of course, more information is good. Transparency is good. And the more opportunities that we can use to educate our kids and educate our adults are a good thing.
At a time where we see mass shootings in schools, and I'm answering questions from the community about arming teachers, yes, I'm generally supportive of SROs being in the schools. We currently do not have an SRO in every school in Boulder Valley School District and St. Vrain Valley School District. And the reason we don't is because of funding shortages. So if the schools and the parents want SROs in the school, I certainly support that, and I agree that having someone trained who knows how to use a firearm in the school, given the challenges and tragedies we face as a country right now, it's appropriate. But I think that question goes to a deeper issue, which is, do we want to see our youth criminalized? And to me, the answer is no. We don't want to see juveniles being criminalized at a young age. When we were young, if you got into a fist fight in school, not that I did, of course, but if we did, it was broken up, you walked away, maybe you got detention. You aren't being arrested. So we should have SROs who are trained and skilled and designated in working with kids. We don't over-criminalize their behavior. It's the same reason we set up that sexting program. The more we criminalize youth at a young age, the more we set up this school to jail to prison pipeline. And I think that's a failure for us as a society. So we need to continue to recruit outstanding men and women in law enforcement who want to be SROs. Whether or not, to the second question, whether or not there's an SRO in the school, I think students should know their rights when it comes to dealing with law enforcement. So regardless of whether there's an SRO there, I think students should know their rights and how to handle themselves when they're on the street with the police, which is why from a very early time in my career, I have volunteered to go into the schools time and time and time again, in a community where people did not trust law enforcement and did not trust prosecutors, to talk to kids about those issues and help them understand what they can expect from the police on the street and how to handle it when the police violate those expectations and the laws, and to avoid themselves from getting into greater trouble on a dark street, but to never let police misconduct go without being reported. And getting out there in the schools is something I've done my entire career. I received an award for it from the New York City Bar Association. And I've continued to do it out here, because I think students should know their rights. Thank you.
So Michael, if I stay, I know that both of these gentlemen could talk at length about school safety and gun issues. The at-length piece is what I need to kind of move away from right now and go to another topic. So I'm going to ask you, Michael, how would you describe the nature and responsibilities required of the relationship between the district attorney and your local law enforcement agencies?
It's a good question. Ideally, it's a strong working relationship between the DA staff, and law enforcement. I say that because at 2 o'clock in the morning, law enforcement is going to respond to a call of someone who's been shot and possibly killed. And you want them to know that they can call the district attorney, and that the district attorney will play an active role in making sure the constitutional rights of everyone involved are preserved. And that the DA can be there to make sure that from the very ground up on a case, that you're making sure the prosecution of any case, a murder case, is done properly. That really depends on a strong working relationship. Where it matters, for example, is the Aurora movie theater shooting. Getting a call as the head of the Attorney General's criminal section and going to that scene and dealing with law enforcement there, dealing with the U.S. Attorney, dealing with the head of the FBI, all people who I've worked with before over the years, and being able to have conversations about what should happen next in this investigation. What are we going to do about the apartment that's booby-trapped? Do you need a search warrant or no? What can you tell the press without violating the defendant's rights about the case? Those questions require experience, but also a strong working relationship with law enforcement. At the same time, that relationship has to be made based on the recognition that we're independent from one another. The DA doesn't have direct control over law enforcement, nor does law enforcement have any direct control over the DA. That's especially important when you think about prosecuting police officers. I've had the duty and obligation of prosecuting police officers throughout my career. Most recently as a special prosecutor for Stan Garnett on a case involving a Boulder police detective who had assisted an internet predator in avoiding apprehension. A truly scary guy, the internet predator. He had child porn on his computer. He had been secretly videotaping his girlfriend in the shower and during sexual acts, and he was preying upon teens through the internet. And this Boulder police detective tried to assist him in avoiding apprehension. I prosecuted the internet predator. He pled guilty and went to state prison. The detective insisted on going to trial, and I successfully prosecuted that case on behalf of the people of Boulder. We have to hold police to the same laws as everyone else. Thank you.
I think it should be a healthy balance. There's two aspects here you have to balance as district attorney. One is you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with the police departments and up and down the line and doing everything that you can in order to make sure that they do a very good job and you can assist them in doing a good job in investigating crimes, being out there, keeping us safe. So whatever we can do as part of the office to make that relationship work better and be there for the police, I think is very important. On the other hand, you have to be a neutral arbiter. As a district attorney, you have to be someone that may end up prosecuting a police shooting, for example. And there really aren't too many more controversial issues in a community than a police shooting. So as the district attorney, of course, you need to be someone that works closely, but also someone that has a little bit of a distance from the police department because you need to be unimpeachable when it comes to your decision on a police shooting, for example. Whatever decision the district attorney makes on a police shooting, whether to prosecute or whether to not prosecute, is going to be unpopular with some segment of people in the community. And so as the DA, you need to be able to stand up in front of a community forum like this, or the city council, or any other group that wants to get together, or individual meetings, and be able to justify that decision. And where it comes into play in many ways is that you have to make sure that there isn't the perception out there that you're too cozy with the police. It can't be out there. Otherwise, you're going to open yourself up to criticism from the people that you're trying to serve. So I think working closely, at the same time trying to keep a fair distance to make sure that you can be neutral and you can make the right decisions when it comes to prosecuting or not, particularly if there's a police shooting.
So the next one will be for you also.
Right.
As a district attorney, what policies related to bail reform, filing decisions, or alternative programs would you support that might alleviate jail overcrowding while still keeping the community safe?
Well, there's 2 points here that I've been talking about a lot during the campaign I believe very strongly in. Number one is that we need to make sure we do more treatment and less jail for those that have mental illnesses and those that have drug offenses. Absolutely, we need to do better with that. We have done some of those programs here in Boulder County. The state has put more funding into those types of programs. We need to divert those types of cases out of the criminal justice system. It doesn't do anybody any good to have, say, a drug offender with drug possession charges in the system. It doesn't work for prosecutors. It doesn't really work for defense counsel, particularly public defenders. It doesn't work for judges or the court system. If you have a deputy district attorney, a line deputy, that has 20 cases and 10 of them are felony drug cases, that doesn't do anybody any good. That deputy DA is not going to want to work on those cases, I don't think. I know that I wouldn't want to. So the more we can do to divert those out of the system, the better. Now that's going to take resources. You can't just divert it from here and then go to nowhere. There has to be a treatment provider at the end to make sure that they give those folks the treatment that they need. Not jail, but treatment. So there are going to need to be more resources dedicated to these types of programs. And I'll be the first one to go to the county commissioners and ask for that specifically. More resources for treatment, not necessarily for prosecutors. Now the second part of the question is bail bond reform. I've talked about that a lot as well. I firmly believe that the size of someone's pocketbook should not determine whether or not they stay in or get out of jail before their case is resolved and before trial. Upwards of 2/3 of the folks in the Boulder County Jail are there before trial. Their case hasn't been resolved. They haven't been convicted of anything for that particular case. So for the lower level cases where their bond is set low because they're not judged to be a flight risk or a public safety risk, we have one of two options. We can try to get them out of the jail pending the resolution of the case where we don't object to a PR bond, it's no bond, or we can try to fast track the case through the system and make sure that we resolve it as quickly as possible. We can do both, and I'll do both of those.
Based on my experience, this question captures why I'm so excited to be your district attorney. Because we are at a critical point in the criminal justice system, and we have an opportunity as a community to lead the way on criminal justice reform, to change how we do bail and bond, to make sure that we have more diversion programs in place. It's the kind of work that it's not just talking about it, it's the kind of work I've been doing throughout my entire career. To be DA in Boulder in a community that wants to see this work done is why I love this job. And it's why I want to continue being a district attorney, not just until January, but for years to come. So let me talk a little bit about these things. First, when it comes to bond reform, I've worked through the ACLU already in an effort to start phasing out cash bail here in Boulder. We should only be holding people who are a threat to the community or a legitimate flight risk. Today, there are 442 people sitting in the jail as we sit here. 40% of them have diagnosed mental health disorders. 60% of them are being held pre-trial, which means they've not yet been convicted of anything. We have too many people being held in the jail. That's why Sheriff Pelley and I have partnered to start this mental health diversion program along with the public defender. That's why I talked earlier about restorative justice and diversion. We need to do a better job as a system getting people back on the right track to cut down on how many people are being incarcerated. We're going to get away from cash bail here in Boulder County. That is my commitment to the ACLU and my commitment to you. When it comes to charging decisions, I teach ethics for prosecutors all throughout the state. And I teach charging decisions at the law school at night. It's an issue that I've been passionate about throughout my career because it's absolutely consistent with the mission of doing justice. Years ago, there was a case at the federal level, not the state level, federal level, where U.S. attorneys admitted that they always charge the highest charge just to coerce a good plea. We will never do that. This office has never done that. And I can assure you that under my administration, we're not going to let that happen. So making sure charging decisions are done in a way that allow for justice to be done ultimately. That's why I paired with Claire Levy, and I'm honored to have her support, on Senate Bill 250 in 2012 for drug sentencing reform here in Colorado. We need to do a lot more, but that bill, that law, took us in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So the next question will be yours. In light of the fear and concerns of the immigrant population resulting from the federal government's increased focus on immigration enforcement, heightened deportation efforts, and rollback of DACA, how can you as DA protect immigrants, both documented or not, in our community?
So upon taking office on day one, I shared with the staff, and I'm happy to give to you my long-term goals for the office. So I truly believe that as a leader, you have to have a shared vision with the staff to develop and advance the office further. If you look in that document, I'm happy to share with you, you'll see that a top priority for us is protecting immigrants. At a time when Donald Trump is president, there's never been as much fear and anxiety in immigrant communities as there is right now. And I'm honored to have the support of so many members of the immigrant communities. So from day one, a priority of mine was getting out into the immigrant communities to tell them that just because there was a new DA in office, that there would be no change in how we approach immigration. Stan Garnett was very much a champion for the immigrant communities. And I plan to continue that and build upon it. So we do that in a couple ways. First, through community outreach. So I'll give you an example. I go talk to a group of 25 Latina women who are being helped by a domestic violence provider. They disclosed to me that at that very moment, they're involved in ongoing relationships, sexual abuse and domestic violence in their home. But they will not report it to the police because they're scared about their status or the status of their partner. Think about that. I've never felt so powerless as a prosecutor as being in a room with women who are sharing with me that they're going to go home and be raped. That's where we have to build that trust. So for them to then, at the end of that meeting, give me their contact information and to call me on the phone in the days that follow and allow us to bring law enforcement to those situations, that's why community outreach is so important. Crime prevention, because immigrants are preyed upon by fraudsters. We do that all the time. The office has a proud legacy of doing it. We're continuing it now. A robust U-Visa program to make sure that people who cooperate with prosecutors as victims and witnesses can remain in the country and have legal status to remain. But finally, not just for victims and witnesses, making sure the defendants can see cases through to completion. So announcing to the defense bar and the immigrant community that we're going to allow defendants to change their court dates if they're worried about ICE watching the court calendar. So that's already underway. These are things that are already taking place. I'm going to stand and fight for our immigrants. Thank you.
I've been there for our immigrant community for years, and I'll continue to be, and they know that. And I've worked with them very closely to make sure that they do feel comfortable coming forward to the district attorney's office, and also to make sure that they feel comfortable having their voice heard when it comes to legislation that affects us all, and particularly the immigration community. So I'll continue that. It takes a while to build that trust with anybody, but particularly this kind of vulnerable community. And I'm glad to say that I have gone a long way in building that trust. We can always do more, we can always do better, and I'll work all the time, constantly, to build that trust with the immigrant community, meeting after meeting after meeting, which I've gone through for years. One thing that we can do, in addition to what we have done at the district attorney's office, is we can make sure that our prosecutors are trained and up to date on collateral consequences of pleas, collateral consequences being potential immigration consequences. This is an ever-changing area of the law. Maybe not necessarily the law is written, but certainly the law is executed, as we know. With the different administration, there are different policies, different priorities, and people getting deported that weren't getting deported before, families getting broken up that weren't getting broken up before. So certainly they're right to be skeptical. But when it comes to local law enforcement, we need to make sure that they're aware and trust local law enforcement, the police force, and the district attorney, that they can come forward if they're a victim or a witness, for sure. Now, we train our prosecutors on collateral consequences because our pleas can lead to results that are much worse than called for as a result of the case. We can have a felony case that comes in, and if that particular undocumented immigrant is forced to take a felony, then they're automatically deportable. Why would we do that if we can get accountability, make restitution, and do what we need to do with getting some other type of plea? Because it can lead to so many worse things. We need to train up on that. We need to have a staff member that is very up to date on the collateral consequences that can advise us. We shouldn't lead it up to the defense counsel. We should be aware of it ourselves.
Mike, if I could ask you to
Yeah.
stay. There's a good part of this question that I think kind of piggybacks off the first question, which would be in regard to those who illegally employ workers who are not documented. What might you do to stop that type of conduct, investigate it, or potentially prosecute it?
Well, I think one area that this brings up very clearly is wage theft. We see this quite often, actually, where if there's an employer that's employing someone that's undocumented, they think they can get work for free. And that's something that, unfortunately, has been not prosecuted in the past around the state in some ways. I think we've done better. I think Boulder has done better. And I think our state law has actually made a lot of improvements, bills that I've supported over the last several years. So we need to focus on that aspect. Wage theft is much more prevalent than most people understand, most people know. And it's easy to see why. If you're an employer that decides that employee is not going to get wages, they're going to say, what are you going to do? Are you going to report it to the police? We'll just get you deported. This is part of a fraud scheme that happens quite often, including here in Boulder County. This is where reaching out to the immigrant community, building trust with the community pays dividends, because then folks like that can come forward to us. Even if the employer is threatening to deport them, they can still come forward to us. We can get it reported, and we can stop that from happening. So it helps the person that's being victimized immediately, but it also helps other people too, because we stop it from happening from that particular perpetrator. So continue to build the trust, focus on wage theft, and I think that's something that we should focus on.
This is another way in which our immigrant community is preyed upon. And I'm going to stand and fight for immigrants. And I'm going to stand and fight for workers, and it's what I've done my entire career. I come from a very blue-collar family. And coming out of high school, we didn't have much money, so I went to community college and I loaded trucks at UPS for 2 years at night to get myself through school. And I was a member of the Teamsters. I'm always going to fight for workers, especially immigrants who are being preyed upon by those that illegally employ them and expect that they'll never come forward. So here are some of the things we're already doing within the district attorney's office, in addition to the community outreach and the crime prevention seminars that we've been providing. We just set up a wage theft symposium for June 19th of this year, where leaders of the business community, immigrant community, and a woman who trains people on how to combat wage theft is coming to train our staff and businesses throughout the Boulder community. That's set for June 19th. We're also setting up a phone and internet hotline so people can make complaints directly to the district attorney's office. So that we have the people, we have the expertise and the resources to respond directly to those individuals in the event that law enforcement may not know how to handle it if someone says that their employer is taking advantage of them. making sure that employers are held accountable. And quite frankly, most businesses, most employers want the bad apples out of the way, right? So making connections with the Chambers of Commerce, Boulder and Longmont are both involved in this effort with us already. I'm absolutely committed to this because we see low-wage earners and immigrants being taken advantage of time and time and time again. Stan Garnett in the office has done a lot in this area. We need to continue it and build upon it and make sure people are not being preyed upon. Thank you.
All right, Michael, if you'll stay. What do you see as the role and the ability of the district attorney in protecting our community from oil and gas development to include criminal prosecution if appropriate?
As the head of the criminal justice section for the Attorney General's office, I successfully prosecuted corporate polluters and environmental crimes all around the state of Colorado. So I have the experience and the passion and the knowledge of the law as your district attorney to make sure our environment is protected. I am passionate about our environment. I will vigorously prosecute any environmental crime committed within our jurisdiction over which the district attorney has authority. Under current law in Colorado, federal prosecutors and the Attorney General's office and a state agency have direct authority over most of the environmental crimes that are committed. If I take out the statute book and I show it to you, you could read that it's the Attorney General's office, federal prosecutors, and this state agency called CDPHE, Public Health and Environment. That's where the jurisdiction lies. But what I did in Jeffco is what we're doing here in Boulder, which is making sure that we have someone on staff who's passionate about the environment, will act as a liaison with those other agencies to make sure that Boulder is represented in the fight to protect our environment. So while those agencies may have more resources and more legal jurisdiction, we have obviously a role in that fight. And I plan to make sure that role is filled by someone on staff. But I'm also not going to mislead you about the power of the district attorney. I could stand up here and tell you that I want to see fracking banned, and that's true. I could stand up here and tell you that fracking is terrible for the environment, and I strongly feel that way. I always have. I can't stand up here and tell you that I have the power to stop fracking. That would be false, and I will not do that. The industry attorney requires integrity. We make decisions about the death penalty, about whether to charge juveniles as adults, whether to dismiss high-profile cases despite public outcry, but because it's the right thing. Those decisions require integrity. I will always be honest with you about the power and role and authority of the district attorney. To the extent I can fight for your environment, our environment, my kids' environment, I've done it before and I'll do it again. You have my solemn commitment on that. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad we're hearing this from my opponent at this point. I'm glad he's come around because this is a gap that I've identified within our office for quite some time. And we have not done environmental crimes prosecutions. It's been a passive approach, and that needs to change. And it needs to change because the state has not done their duty. The Attorney General's office has not done their duty. The state agencies have not done their duty in prosecuting environmental crimes. If you have a situation like what happened in Firestone, where an oil and gas facility caused a house to blow up, we need to be on the front lines and making sure that we're investigating that crime, if it is a crime. We're investigating the situation to see if a crime was committed, and we're bringing it forth. The fact that it's an oil and gas industry defendant should mean nothing. We should treat them like any other defendant here in Boulder County. We need to be on the front lines of this, and we need to be a little bit against the status quo. The status quo has been to let the state handle it, let the Attorney General handle it. That's not right for Boulder County. We need to do much better in this area, and we will. Now, the statute does allow for district attorney involvement in several different ways. You can get a case referred to you by the state agency. Also, under the Water Quality Control Act, you can actually exercise original jurisdiction. You can do the investigation yourself as a district attorney's office. Law enforcement can do an investigation themselves. You can be involved with the state agency. Now, this is nothing that's totally radical because it's happened in other areas as well, particularly economic crime prosecutions that I undertook when I was doing economic crimes in the office. Working with federal agencies, working with state agencies, being a presence, being assertive, and working hard on behalf of Boulder County. That's what prosecuting environmental crimes is all about. If the oil and gas industry comes in here in Boulder County and dumps on us, I guarantee you they need to hear from us, and they will from me as district attorney.
So So there are several questions. There are good questions coming in. I'm trying to tie some of them to topics that the organizers have asked me to cover. And those that I don't get to, I'll try and get back to when we wrap up the ones I have been asked to present. So, Mike, I think you would write this one. The Daily Camera has reported lately about the recent increase in number of felony-level crimes being committed in Boulder County. First, do you have any insight as to what might be driving this increase? And second, what will you do as DA to address this increase?
Well, I wish I could stand up here and give you a definitive answer. I can't. I don't think anybody can. This is something we've struggled with in Boulder County, and we're not alone. Statewide, there have been increases in felony filings. A lot of them in Boulder County have been a result of domestic violence and also felony drug possession. Drug possession cases are something that we've addressed before. Those cases should not be in our system. They should be diverted out. Just like what Longmont's doing right now with the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. They don't send those cases to the Boulder District Attorney's Office. They send them straight to treatment. We're not involved. And that's how it should be with those types of cases. Low-level mental health cases as well. If it's a felony drug case, we should not have a felony deputy that should be working on something different, working on that particular case. They go to treatment, not jail. They go to treatment, not probation. That's my opinion. So that helps. That helps address some of the issues. If you have a deputy that has 20 cases and you take away 5 of those cases, that's more time that they can spend on cases they should be spending their time on. Now, when it comes to domestic violence, that's also a difficult issue. Why is it going up? I'm not sure anyone knows for sure. I know that we can do better here in Boulder County, and we can draw upon models around the state. We actually have a really great model here in Boulder County for child sex assault investigations called Blue Sky Bridge. They used to just do forensic interviews with children, and now they've expanded into treatment programs with those same children. We can do the same thing here with domestic violence, kind of like what Denver has done. Under one roof, the Rosandum Center down in Denver is a very good program. It costs money, though. Of course, like Blue Sky Bridge, we'd have to raise the money. We'd have to have donors. We'd have to have community support. But those types of things can actually make a difference, and they have made a difference in Denver. They can make a difference here in Boulder as well.
We've seen a dramatic increase in felony cases being filed over the last several years. So, for example, and of the most concern to me and to our staff, in 2012 we had 603 violent felonies committed in Boulder County filed with the District Attorney's Office. 603. Last year we had 795. This year we'll have over 900. There's been no change in misdemeanor numbers. So in other words, it's not as though DAs are charging those cases more seriously. Those are violent felonies that have come in as violent felonies that are being treated as violent felonies. That's a serious concern to us. We have a couple of pieces of good news, though. First is, although there's been no increase in the staffing of the office, we have amazing women and men working in that office every day, 87 people, who do incredible work on your behalf to deal with that increase in crime. We've also had an increase in nonviolent crime. But part of what I look at, too, is sex assaults and domestic violence. At a time where victims are coming forward more often, I don't look at that increase necessarily as a bad thing. We want victims to come forward. So in years past, where they would hide in the shadows because they were scared to report, if they're feeling more supported by our office and coming forward because our culture is changing as a society, that's a good thing. You'll never see me overreact to these numbers because I've worked in jurisdictions where crime was through the roof. I started my career in an office where the first appearance court was open 24 hours a day. So you work your regular caseload and then go work your night shift or the overnight shift. So when I look at these numbers, I'm concerned, but you're not going to hear me overreact. But I am concerned. We have 5 homicide trials this year, which is 3 more than in years past. We had 8 vehicular homicides last year, which is 6 more than the highest year before that. So those are numbers that concern us. But we're going to tackle the drug and opioid epidemic. We're working on it right now. We're going to make sure that we do everything we can to help people get back on the right track. I really believe the opportunity we have is when someone first enters the criminal justice system, to get them to a place where they're not committing a violent felony years later, to give them the help they need. Thank you.
So both of you have referred at one time or another to the issues related to mental health in the community and in the criminal justice system. I would like to ask each of you to address what you think you can do as district attorney to address those issues, how it impacts the criminal justice system, and what resources perhaps Boulder needs.
It's why we started the mental health diversion program. It's the guy Brent that I started to tell you about earlier. 35 times arrested in the last 5 years. He's a huge guy, by the way. Which only matters because on Saturday when I was walking to the Jewish festival with my kids, and I heard someone yell, "Hey, Mr. DA!" And I saw him out of the corner of my eye. I felt the moment. I was like, oh no. But he gave me a big bear hug and said he saw campaign signs and he was very happy for me. Seriously. It's actually a funny moment because he said, "I saw campaign signs. I wanted to pull them out of the ground because you are the DA." I said, "No, Brent, I'm also running for DA. You have to leave them in the ground." He said, "Okay, good. I'm glad I asked you." My daughter said, "That guy was really big." But that really big guy has been arrested 35 times in the last 5 years. And he shared with me that he has a mental health disorder. We have to do better for him. We have to do better for our community. Sometimes when I'm out in the community, people will say to me, "Are you going to criminalize the homeless? Do you think homelessness is a crime?" And I say no. Being homeless is not, should not, and will not be a crime. And then I go to my next meeting and someone will say, "How are you going to protect my kids? I can't take them to the public library in Boulder anymore because I'm scared." I actually think the answer to both questions is the same, which is being more progressive and innovative. That's why we started this mental health diversion program. That's why Boulder's a pilot site. That's why Sheriff Pelly, the Boulder Public Defender, and I partnered on this from day one of my administration. Because there's a lot the DA can do. I've been in court for 21 years. I can't tell you how many times people with mental health issues cycle in and cycle out of the criminal justice system. We need more community resources, but we as a criminal justice system can do better. That's why in Jefferson County we started an adult mental health court and a juvenile mental health court. In fact, the guy who helped start him is now with the Boulder DA's office. Thank you.
I think a lot of the answer to this is somewhat redundant from what we've talked about before. We shouldn't be dealing with those cases at all as the DA. They should be going through treatment, not through the court system. And I'll point back to recognition in the Boulder area, of course. I think we've recognized it earlier than some, but also at the state level to make sure that we do better. It does require more funding. You can't divert a case and divert it to nowhere. There has to be treatment. There has to be treatment providers out there. So Senate Bill 249, a bill that I co-sponsored this year, did provide treatment programs for those with mental illness to 4 areas around the state. And I'm really glad that Boulder is taking advantage of that. It's a long process. It requires a lot of work, and it requires funding from the state, and it requires funding from the county. I have a very good relationship with the county commissioners. They're supporting me in this race. I'm going to go to them, and I've already said this to them, I'm going to go to them first thing and advocate for more funding for diversion programs, drug treatment, mental health treatment, because that benefits everybody. It benefits the DA's office, the defense, the court, and of course, the offender. We have to be focused on this, and going in day one, that'll be the first thing that I do. I won't be advocating for more resources for the office. I'll be advocating for more resources for treatment. We've talked about this, but I think it's just so important. It really underpins one of the most fundamental parts of our system that isn't going as well as it could. Right now, it's actually easier for prosecutors to just cycle the case into probation and they can be done with it. It takes less resources to do that. But we need to be more open-minded and more creative and make sure that in the long run, it's much better actually to funnel it into diversion or divert it out of the system into treatment immediately. It'll break the vicious cycle. We won't see them again, hopefully. So we'll focus on that.
Okay, Mike. I want to commend Katie and Ellen for the next question because somebody in the audience is very passionate about this one and feels that it really hasn't been addressed in some of the other forums, perhaps. So, what community partnerships do you hope to build during your time as DA specifically? How will you work with organizations in the county like SPAN, St. Vrain Safe Shelter, and others to address the prevalence of sexual assault and with particularity protecting our children from sex assault?
Well, again, I think that there is a good relationship right now that is between the Boulder District Attorney's Office and many of those partnerships. And I can speak especially to the relationship with Blue Sky Bridge because I've worked very closely with Blue Sky Bridge on cases, actually prosecuting cases. They're fantastic, by the way. The forensic interviewing services that they do have helped us secure so many convictions and the right thing on cases that we would not have been able to do otherwise. My wife Heidi was on the Blue Sky Bridge board for 6 years. She was the treasurer of that board. And the only reason she was on it for 6 years is because, believe it or not, they actually have term limits for Blue Sky Bridge Board, just like they do for legislators and county commissioners. So we're still actively involved in the organization. We have nothing but good things to say about them, and work very closely as a prosecutor, as a legislator, and as a community leader. And we can do that with other organizations as well. It takes work, like any relationship. It takes attention. It takes priority. And as I said, I think we do it okay here in Boulder County. We can always do better. And it'll just take sitting down, talking with folks, establishing those relationships, building those relationships, making sure that they know that we at the district attorney's office are going to go to bat for them. We're going to work with them closely, and we're all part of the same team. So I don't have too much to offer to improve it other than just more of the same. Do better than what we're doing. I think we have good organizations here in Boulder County. We can build them. We can continue to do better.
We have too many victims to just do more of the same. So as someone who specialized in sex crimes for my entire career and was in charge of 45 prosecutors working on sex crimes, as someone who started the human trafficking unit in the Manhattan DA's office, who helped start the human trafficking unit in Jefferson County, I've seen directly how you can get into the community and impact kids' lives before they're victimized. So in Jefferson County, for example, we would identify with the schools at-risk kids before they were victimized. We have to do more. It's not just more of the same. We have to do better. We get out in the community, we connect with kids through the Parent Engagement Network. And we help kids and families realize what we as a county can do to help them before they become victimized. I'm reminded of a young boy who was sexually assaulted by his assistant principal. And he went to a friend and told a friend that he was being sexually assaulted. And that friend's mom called the police. And I'll always remember that case because he was one of 8 boys who was being sexually assaulted by the assistant principal. But for the strength of that kid and that friend, there would have been a 9th, a 10th, and 11th. But it's not enough to do more of the same. We have to do better. We do better by getting out in the community, by providing resources. We do better by having the best sex assault unit in the entire state of Colorado in our office right now. They are terrific. They are regarded as the best in the state of Colorado. We do better by starting the Workplace Sex Assault Task Force, the first in the state, to get into workplaces and change the culture around sex harassment and sex assault. So Katarina Booth, who's a renowned leader in sex crimes, and I, and Karen Datz. And if you haven't read Karen Datz's guest opinion in the Daily Camera about this, I encourage you to go back and read it, about how we can work to change cultures in the workplace. We were invited to speak at this Startup Week, conference for young business owners to let them know we're not going to tolerate that conduct. We could do better. We have to do better. Thank you.
Okay, Michael. As prisoners enter the parole system, what are some of the community initiatives that you will support to ensure their transition to secure housing, work, and reentry to make sure they're successful when they get out?
This is an issue that we should all be passionate about. This is an issue that we all have a vested interest in. I have had the responsibility of sending some offenders to state prison for the rest of their lives on horrific cases. But the vast majority of cases we see and handle, people are getting back out of jail and back out of prison. And if we don't do a better job helping them rehabilitate, we're failing them, we're failing future victims, and we're failing the community. I so strongly believe in this. That's why I've partnered with Focus Reentry and Reentry Initiatives, 2 leaders in the community here in Boulder County on helping people transition from jail and prison back into our communities. And they're doing really good work. But we have those agencies and others operating in silos. So leading an effort over the summer to bring people together to talk about how can we do better, how can we coordinate, how can we synchronize on what we're going to do for people returning to the community. We have to do that. Because currently we have 50%, 50, of all people released from state prison in Colorado are back in state prison within 3 years. That number is an absolute failure for everyone, including taxpayers. That's a failure. That number drives us to think actively about criminal justice reform, but also reentry initiatives. It also drives me to recognize that private prisons should be banned here in the state of Colorado. No part of the justice system should be based on profit. We have 3 private prisons operating for profit with a shown rate of less success helping people rehabilitate and get back on the right track. Our legislators gave them $78 million last year of your money, of our money. That can't exist. We need programs that help people who, when they get out of jail and get out of prison, can return to their families, return to work, and be productive members of society. We have some great agencies doing that work here in Boulder already. But one of my first things that I did as district attorney when I took office on March 1st was reach out to Focus Reentry and Reentry Initiative and start this process of how can we make Boulder County a better place for people returning to the population. Thank you.
First of all, we need to make sure that people that we're sending to prison are there for a good reason. That we're not sending people to prison unnecessarily, that we're making sure we focus on those that need to be in prison. Because for those that go to prison, particularly those that really could have been handled in a different way, once they get out, sometimes they're even worse than when they went in. So on the front end, we need to deal with making sure that we have plenty of discretion to handle the case in a way that doesn't involve prison. Now on the back end, for those that do go to prison and then they come out, we have 1 out of 2 that recidivate within the first 3 years after prison. And we've struggled with this issue statewide for quite some time. But I think there's good news on the horizon. There's programs, particularly a program in Aurora and one in Colorado Springs right now, that have shown fantastic improvements in the recidivism rate. Fantastic improvements. They're community-based programs. Much of the funding has come from the state, and much of the funding has come from parole reforms, actually, that we've done at the state, those that I've supported. And so we can draw upon all of those things. We can draw upon that experience, and we can make our system better even here in Boulder County. But we really should be focused more than anything on making sure that the people that go to prison really should be the ones that are there. We need to make sure that we're not sending people there unnecessarily. And so that'll be a focus, and then making sure that our programs here are better.
I want to make sure you folks know I'm looking at these questions. There are a couple that I don't feel I should ask, but I don't want to be dismissive of anybody. There's one, that asks each of them to name people within the office that support them. I don't think it's appropriate for them to have to do that, to call people out within the office. So I'm not going to ask them to do that. And again, I'll try and circle back to some of these if we get through some more questions. Kind of a timely issue, Mike. This week, the Masterpiece cake shop case was announced by the United States Supreme Court. Upon initial read, there was a lot of disappointment by many in the community, but further reading suggests that the decision erred on neutrality but demonstrated shortcomings in Colorado's Civil Rights Commission. Where are our vulnerabilities for legally supporting human and civil rights in Boulder County, and what changes will you or could you make to address these? That's part one, and this is complicated. And if this case had started in Boulder County, what could have been done differently, perhaps?
Okay, so that's a lot to unwrap in 3 minutes, but yeah. I guess I would say is I kind of share the initial reaction that Tom mentioned, which was disappointment upon that ruling, because it came out that the baker won in that case. But upon further reflection, of course, looking at the opinion and speaking with others about it, I've come to the part that Tom mentioned before, which is that it certainly wasn't as bad as it could have been. I mean, with our Supreme Court that we have right now, when they took cert on that case, and they agreed to hear it, I was really concerned that that was going to cause some problems for our law here in Colorado. But they made a very narrow decision in that case, and that was really that there was one commissioner, the Colorado Civil Rights Division, that was unnecessarily dismissive of religious considerations. So basically, I guess more or less they were saying he was kind of a jerk. I mean, that's pretty much how they came out. So it's not a systemic issue, actually. And in fact, if it turned out that there were some other things on the record, or maybe that guy would have not gone as far as he did on a couple of his statements, the case would have come out completely different. That's how narrow the case ended up being. Now, we dealt with this in reauthorizing the Civil Rights Division this last year. And I fought to make sure that we still had a strong Civil Rights Division that was reauthorized this year. I'm really glad that we did that. There's really, in my opinion, not much wrong with the Civil Rights Division right now. They're They do good work for the people in the state. Now, we can always do better, of course, here in Boulder County. And there was a gap in the law that was identified to me several years ago about bias-motivated crimes. We have bias-motivated harassment if you harass somebody, but if it's on the basis of certain categories, race, gender, etc., then it ups the misdemeanor level, makes it a higher level misdemeanor. But there were two things that were not covered in bias-motivated harassment that should have been: LGBTQ and disability. So I worked to make sure we close that gap, because that's meaningful, and it's meaningful to those communities. And we actually, amazingly enough, believe it or not, passed it through a Republican Senate. And I'm very proud of that, and those are the efforts that I'll continue to put forth.
I agree with Mike Foote that the Masterpiece decision was fairly narrow, and his analysis and mine are the same on that point. Where I'm concerned is when I read the first line of Justice Kennedy's legal decision. He reaffirms that gay people are not social outcasts. And if that still needs to be said, if that's our starting point, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. Since Donald Trump became president, we've seen over a 6% increase in hate crimes nationwide. Boulder's not exempt from that. If you talk to the LGBTQ community, if you talk to the folks at the Jewish Community Center, if you talk to immigrant groups, they will all tell you what they've told me, that hate crimes have gone up in Boulder County. It's hard to believe when you look outside these windows at where we live that that's the case, but that is very much the reality in which people are living in, particularly in communities that are vulnerable. So we must do better. That's why after the Masterpiece Cake decision was announced, I joined with Out Boulder at their rally outside the courthouse. An opportunity to tell the community that our approach is not changing, that discrimination is not permitted, that intolerance will not be tolerated, and that bias and hate crimes will be dealt with and fought against by my office. The shame of it is, even after that story was carried in the front of the Daily Camera, that message was delivered loud and clear to the community, and Mike Foote was there as well. I want to be clear that he was there too. We delivered that message to the community. It was not heard. Immediately after the decision, there were hate crimes being committed within our jurisdiction. So what are the gaps? There's a couple. First, the community has to trust that law enforcement and DAs are going to take these cases seriously and that they can come forward and report them. Second, law enforcement has to have the training, ability, and resources to respond to these cases and view them as hate crimes, not as free speech. There's a difference. And view them in the way they are, which are hate and intimidation. So we're starting a bias and hate crimes initiative in my office, in conjunction with the JCC and Out Boulder and other groups, to raise awareness, increase training for law enforcement, but also for the DAs, to make sure that we have a diverse office that is committed to being fair and equal and fighting for everyone. Thank you.
Michael.
I will just say it's a sign that Mike Foote, not to speak for him, and I get a little tired that we keep forgetting that we're supposed to remain standing.
Just like last night. What experience do you have in recruiting and managing multiculturally diverse employees?
So this has been an important area for me throughout my career because I truly believe that when someone comes into the courthouse and they enter a courtroom, they should never have the impression, the view, or the reality that the system is not fair and equal. And if they look around the courtroom and everyone is of a certain gender and a certain race, that's where that perception, if not the reality, grows. That's why when I was at the Manhattan DA's office in New York City, I started a diversity outreach program to increase the diversity in the applicant pool. And doing resume workshops, interview workshops, reaching out to the minority groups throughout law schools in New York City and the country to encourage them to apply to our office. We saw an immediate spike in the diversity of our applicant pool and our office staff at all levels, not just lawyers, but all levels. That is so important. It's a priority of mine. It's why I did that at the Attorney General's office and why when I was in Jefferson County, we did the same thing, sending letters out to the Bar Association, affinity groups, and minority groups at the law school. It's why I went to DU just last year. First I went and said, if you want to be a prosecutor, come attend this seminar. We had about 15 people there. The next time we did it, we promoted it as a, if you have concerns about law enforcement and the fairness of the criminal justice system, come talk to us. We had 70 people there. And from that, we had about 1/3 who wanted to be prosecutors, 1/3 who wanted to yell at me, and 1/3 who were open-minded about it. But that's how we start to change minds, and that's how we start to make our offices more diverse. That's what I've done throughout my career. Stan Garnett did a terrific job building diversity within the office. If you come to our office and you go to the reception desk, they're bilingual. People throughout the office are diverse and bilingual. That is so important, and we need to build upon that success because we have a lot of people in the community who, when they come to the courthouse and they come to the district attorney's office, the system has to be fair and equal, and it has to appear as fair and equal. So if you want to talk to me about the diversity breakdown in my office, gender breakdown in my office, the wonderful female leaders throughout the office, I'm happy to have that discussion after we get done here tonight. But it's a priority for me throughout my entire career, and I stand by my record on it, and I promise you we're going to continue to do it. Thank you.
Right. I mean, I don't think there's any disagreement between us on this. It's so important. It's essential, and it's something that I've also promoted, particularly within my legislative office, to show up to job fairs, to show up to recruitment fairs, to actively show up at law schools, because I did a lot of recruitment of law students for my legislative office. I just felt like that they did really good work and were able to help me out quite a bit. So. It's about showing up, it's about being there, and it's about just making it a priority. So I don't know if I need to go into too much more detail because I think, as I said, we agree with many of those.
I'm going to try and morph some of these questions. Both of you talked earlier in terms of relationships with law enforcement and touched on officer-involved incidents and how you have to handle those. I'd like to take it to the next level of public corruption in general. What do you think can be done in terms of ferreting out public corruption at the local level? And also, what would your position be on prosecuting public officials within your county, people who you may know or work with on a regular basis?
Well, I think this does kind of go to one of the questions we answered earlier, which is relationship with law enforcement. You have to understand that there has to be a close working relationship, but also you have to be prepared to treat law enforcement like any other kind of defendant, just like any defendant. If it turns out that there's information that a particular law enforcement officer is corrupt or doing something wrong, you have to prosecute that case aggressively like you would any other type of case. And so I've always been about treating similarly situated defendants the same in that regard. They don't get special treatment because they're a law enforcement officer. In fact, part of the argument I think that I've made in the past with these law enforcement cases has been that they should actually have more of a sanction because they had the public trust in the fact that they were a law enforcement officer. So we have to make sure that we're aggressive, we're investigating these cases, and we're prosecuting as necessary. Down at the legislature, I've had, I would say, a mixed relationship with the police unions because they've come down and testified on bills and asked me to vote against particular bills that I thought were the right bills to vote for, and I voted for them. And I've also taken the position that they wanted me to take before as well because it was the right thing to do. And I think when you're in the middle of that, it's easy to say you're going to do something, but when you actually have to cast the vote, and when you know you're going to cause some issues with your relationship with that particular police union, for example, as a result of casting that vote, but you still cast it because it's the right thing to do, that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's the kind of approach I'll take as a district attorney as well. I know that I'll take flack from law enforcement for prosecuting some of their own in certain cases. I know that I'll take flack from the community if we don't go far enough in their opinion. But I'll always do the right thing and stand up and justify what I did in front of any group that asks.
If I could ask that we give Mike one more minute due to my lack of clarity. I'd like him to expand on beyond police officers and sheriff's deputies, the potential for whether you're talking about assessors, treasurers, county commissioners, that type of issue where perhaps it's a different kind of public official, but again, one that you have relationships with potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the answer is going to be all that much different there because as district attorney, we have to investigate and prosecute crimes regardless of who the defendant is. So if the defendant turns out to be an assessor or a treasurer or some other county official, it's our job to do that. And we have to know that as a result of prosecuting that, we may have had a personal relationship, we may have worked together with them, but our job is higher than that friendship. And that's happened to me in the past where I've had friendship with somebody that's been a defendant and they've asked for something and I haven't given them what they wanted and I've lost that friendship. So I just know that that's part of the job. It's unfortunate, I suppose, but you have to understand that going into it. You're not going to be district attorney to be the most popular person on the block. You know, nobody wants to come to a district attorney necessarily. Nobody wants to come to court. So you have to know that you might be unpopular with some people, but doing the right thing, standing up for the right thing, makes up for all that. That's your job.
I think this is one of the more important questions for a district attorney. Public corruption cannot be tolerated and cannot be accepted. So there are some things we can and should and are already doing to make sure that we can respond to public corruption. So the first part of the question is, how do we ferret it out? We make sure that people have an independent mechanism to report to my office when they have an allegation of public misconduct or public corruption by an official. So we have that in place. We've had that in place in other offices where I've worked, and I think that's absolutely essential. We have district attorney investigators working in our office who are separate from law enforcement, who work under our command, my command and direction, and they would help and investigate these cases. It's also identifying that, you know, Mr. Foote talked about prosecuting a case involving a friend. We should never have people prosecuting cases involving people they know. Just because even the perception of it is something that may call into question the integrity of the process. So we have something that I so strongly believe in here in Colorado, which is a special prosecution system, to ensure that if there is that kind of relationship, and it's what led to me prosecuting that Boulder police detective, that you can call upon another office. So having overseen that program in other offices where I've worked, and now here in Boulder with Katarina Booth's help, she's the second in command in the office, we make sure that if there's ever that kind of conflict, we immediately recognize it, identify it, and remove our office from it so the members of the community never have a question about the integrity of the investigation. It's why 2 years ago I was standing in front of a jury in Adams County prosecuting a young man who was related to someone in the district attorney's office who had killed a 23-year-old woman coming home from church on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Because we have to respect and have independent inquiry into those cases. They're too important. So having overseen prosecution of police officers and public officials, to ferret it out, you need an independent process. You need staff in the office who have the expertise and passion to investigate these cases, and you have to have the independence and the knowledge to call upon other offices whenever there's a question of any relationship there. Public corruption is too important for anything less. Thank you.
Michael, I have a few things that the theme seems to be around potentially at-risk or other underserved or vulnerable populations in the community. How might you as district attorney help address some of these populations, and what can the county do to assist some of these populations?
It's a really important question, and I helped pass legislation for mandatory reporting of elder abuse. We now have that here in Colorado, and that's an important step we took for financial abuse, but also for physical abuse. So making sure elders are protected and seniors are not preyed upon in our community is something I've worked on throughout my career, and it's something we're doing in the Boulder DA's office. We do that in a couple of ways. So to answer the question directly, to make sure that we do crime prevention for elders and for at-risk people in the community. So by that I mean, for example, going out just a few weeks ago and standing in front of a group of people and explaining, if you get a phone call from the IRS will actually never call you. Hang up the phone. And teaching them practical tips, which I hope you're going to do in the future. Hang up the phone if the IRS calls you. It's a scam. So going out and arming people so they don't become victimized in the first place. And then making sure that we have the resources in place to respond. So in Jeffco, we had an elder abuse unit. It was the first in the state. In Boulder, they, under Stan Garnett's leadership, have had a robust and active unit dedicated to crime prevention and community outreach and the prosecution of cases of at-risk adults. I had the great honor of being with the office at an award ceremony put on by Firefly Autism, because there was an autistic boy who was being abused physically and sprayed in the face by an aide on a bus, a school aide on a school bus. And that abuse went on, and the parents had no idea what was happening. The kid would come home beaten. The kid would come home clearly agitated and injured and could not communicate with his family. Our staff, along with law enforcement from Longmont PD, did an incredible job on that case. They did it all. And as a result, they received an award for standing up and fighting for that at-risk boy. That's the kind of approach the office has had for years. I've done that work in the past. I'm passionate about it. I'm going to continue it as your district attorney. Thank you.
This is one area where proactive and a proactive approach really works and it pays dividends. And that's something that the Boulder office has done for quite some time and to good success, I think. Reaching out to the elderly community, reaching out and training folks that are now mandatory reporters, and making sure that they understand what the new law is, and making sure that they can report these types of incidents before they get even worse. And education is key. It's something that we're not necessarily used to doing as prosecutors. We're used to being reactive as opposed to proactive. But I think that what the district attorney's office has done in the past has been good and solid, and being proactive and reaching out and having specialists that do it. There are still gaps in the law, and we're slowly filling those gaps, and we're slowly making it better. One example that I'll give you is a bill that I passed several years ago that we were finding that under our current theft statutes, we weren't able to prosecute certain types of cases, but it was clear that the victim was being exploited. The victim was actually giving up money against his or her will, more or less. But, of course, you have somebody that doesn't have all their faculties like they used to. It's a little bit hard sometimes to prove it under the previous law. So we passed a law that expanded that and made exploitation actually an offense. Exploitation of an elder is actually an offense as opposed to just theft. There's different elements, and we're able to really capture some of the more nefarious scams that particularly, unfortunately, many family members use against their own family. And so we'll continue to do that, continue to be proactive, continue to ferret out these gaps, and I'll continue to go to the legislature and go to our legislators and make sure that we have strong laws on the books to make sure that these can be prosecuted and hopefully prevented in the first place.
Okay. I've got maybe a couple more here. I do want to say there were a few questions related to oil and gas again that, frankly, I think did this. So I'm not going to ask either one of them. I think you guys know those issues, and I think these folks have talked about those issues, so I'm going to move to a couple more of the note cards. One, I think, is pretty significant. How would you characterize the most significant difference between you and your opponent?
Well, I'll go back to what we talked about with environmental crimes. I've thought for quite some time, and certainly what I've been talking about a lot in this campaign, is that we have a gap in our prosecutions in our office. We need to fill that gap and prosecute environmental crimes. And it's part of a bigger picture that we all know, of course, that oil and gas, they're not the only perpetrators of environmental crime, of course, but it's most relevant here in Boulder County because oil and gas industry wants to move in a big way. There have been some operations here, historic operations, but it's been pretty minimal. They want to move in a big way. And probably a lot of people in this room are concerned about that. Certainly the folks that I've represented in eastern Boulder County are very concerned about that. I hear about it every single day. So we have to band together in Boulder County and be focused on this threat to our way of life. We have to be aggressive. We have to be creative. There are a number of creative solutions that are being bandied around within our county, from certain taxing schemes to civil disobedience and everything in between. And I think we also have to do our part as part of the district attorney's office to be creative and do something that may not have been done before, which is prosecute environmental crimes. We investigate, we lean forward in investigating those potential crimes, and if the evidence supports it, we prosecute it. We don't leave it up to the state because the state hasn't done the job. They just haven't. I've been down to the state for 6 years, I can tell you. They've dropped the ball when it comes to, particularly with oil and gas. We need to pick that up and make it clear that it's not welcome here in Boulder County. We need to have a district attorney that feels passionate about this and not really dismissive of it, because that's the only way that we can actually go forward, make it known to the oil and gas industry. Let's prevent it, first of all. But if it does happen, we're not going to give them a pass just because they're the big, bad, powerful oil and gas industry. We're going to prosecute them just like we would any other defendant that violates the law.
I actually don't think we're that different when it comes to the environment. in the fall, my opponent called me a champion of the environment, which I really appreciate, genuinely. The only thing that has changed since then is now we're vying for the same job. That's it. I'm the same person that he called the champion of the environment. The exact same person. Here's the thing. When it comes to environmental protection, we feel passionate about those issues. We say, as my opponent does, that the environment's been ignored by the office, and the office has been passive. It impugns the integrity of the staff, it impugns the integrity of the district attorney's office, and he worked there during that time. So I keep waiting for the case. I keep waiting for him to say, and that's the time I went to Stan Garnett and said, the Smith mine has to be prosecuted. We have jurisdiction. Let's be creative. There's never a case when he says these things. I wait for the statute. Not just words like creative and leaning in, but an actual statute, something from the book of laws that we take to court that allows us to be there and prosecute cases. There's never a statute. Fracking concerns so many people, but to prey upon those concerns is unfair. You can't get creative with the law. When you say that, you scare defense attorneys who want prosecutors to act with integrity and ethics. I actually think Mike Foote has been a champion of the environment. I really do. He's done great work in the legislature, and he should be applauded for that. And every election cycle I've given to his campaign, and I would support him continuing to do that kind of work, because we need someone to fight for the environment in our legislature. But DA is a different job, and it's why the criminal justice system is supporting my campaign. Criminal defense attorneys, criminal justice reform advocates, prosecutors, law enforcement unions, and victim advocates. DA is a different and very important job. Thank you.
Can we continue on this?
I'd like to get a couple more questions. Can we do it in the closing, maybe? All right. And partially that's because this is a really good question.
As opposed to.
And I'm going to read it as written because I actually like it as written. A huge backlash to domestic violence arrest policies in the 1990s has been the unprecedented arrest of women for DV perpetration. Boulder County for many years has had one of the highest rates in the U.S. for arresting women for DV. What would you do about this?
I agree with Tom, not about the part about it's good to be king, but this is a really serious issue. And mandatory arrest policies, which were put in place with best intentions, and what I mean by that is there was a day where law enforcement would show up at a house and a man would have assaulted a woman before they got there, and they would say, all right, you two work it out. And too many of those cases resulted in serious injury and death after the police left. So as a result, the law in Colorado and in many states across the nation changed, and now there are mandatory arrest policies. The problem with this is this is a real case example from years ago, if the police show up and the male in the house says, she just threw orange juice on me and it hurt me, the police are in a position where they may have to make an arrest. It's a mandatory arrest. They don't have discretion. We took discretion away from the police. But you've identified correctly, in my opinion, that the pendulum has swung too far. And as a result, we have female offenders being arrested at a higher rate than they should be. It's not only a problem here in Boulder, it's a problem in different parts of the state, including Jefferson County. So part of what we started to do there was examine the data every month. How many women are being arrested? And then we had someone assigned to go through every case file for every female offender arrested in a domestic violence case to determine, did the police actually do the right thing? Did they identify what we call in prosecution the primary aggressor correctly? And we were finding that the police were not, that they were overcompensating because of the mandatory arrest policy. So in response, we started doing follow-up on those cases and more training for law enforcement throughout the jurisdiction. We need to continue to examine the data and train law enforcement and also DA staff to make sure that women are not being prosecuted at a greater rate simply because male offenders know how to game the system and have women being arrested. The numbers have skyrocketed in different parts of the state, including Boulder and Jeffco. It's a very real and legitimate concern. The answer is data, training, and making sure the prosecutors are fully aware and able to respond to it. Thank you.
Yeah, really it does come down to training on the front end, because once the arrest is made, of course, the arrest is made, they spend the night or the weekend in jail, and then the vicious circle can continue. They can lose their job, lose their housing, and so forth. And these are really oftentimes, or I should say sometimes, victims themselves. So the police to take that into consideration when making the decision is key. I mean, a lot of these cases are actually being dismissed at some point in time later on, but we have a defendant who's really a victim of domestic violence that has to go through the jail, has to post bond sometimes, has to sometimes hire an attorney or apply for the public defender, and go through the system at some point in time before it's dismissed. We should do that earlier rather than later, and the earliest we could possibly do it is on scene with the police, having correct training, being able to consider these things, and using the full discretion that they can use. And they do have to make a mandatory arrest under many circumstances, but they can consider the victim dynamics. They can consider the cycle of violence, and they can decide whether or not the allegation that has been made is something that reaches the level of probable cause for an arrest. They can decide all of those things. But sometimes what we see is an officer on the street that doesn't want to make a mistake, and that's understandable. They don't want to be the ones that are tagged with not making an arrest when they should have, so sometimes they overcompensate. They need to have the confidence and the resources and the tools to make sure that they can actually go out on a limb if it doesn't feel right, and take all of those things in consideration and use the discretion that they do have. This is a source, this needs to be a source of constant training, constant reminding, because it's happening too often. Once is too often, actually, but it's happening more than that. And I think most of those cases are being dismissed at some point, but it's too late. It should happen at the arrest phase or the lack of the arrest phase.
So I've got two things I want to touch on real quickly before we let these folks wrap up. One is I want to thank whoever submitted the question commiserating with me on my drive from I-25 in Hamden that took 2 hours, and asking what, if anything, either one of these folks could do to sue CDOT. I'm going to let them mull that one over and maybe not answer it right now. Kind of on a shorter note, I understand where you're coming from on the CDOT question, trust me. In terms of the worthy cause tax, and my understanding is this is an avenue for more resources for programs in the community, such as diversion, mental health, or other resources. I think this is just a yes/no for both of you. Would you support an increase for such purposes? The worthy cause tax.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. That was simple.
Give us a choice.
What I'd like to do now is, Katie, do we have time to give them maybe 3 minutes instead of 2?
Yeah.
Give each of you 3 minutes to kind of close up. Is it Michael first? I think
Yeah.
that's right.
This might be our last candidate forum. So I really do want to stress, I have a lot of respect for Mike, and he's been a really good legislator for Boulder County. I mean that. And that's why I've supported him in the past, and if there's ever a time in the future, I would support him again. He's done really good work in the legislature, period. As district attorney, it is my job to oversee a staff of 87 people working on cases ranging from trespass to homicide, where public safety is so important and so critical. But criminal justice reform is just as important. You want a district attorney with the leadership experience, vision, and proven track record of criminal justice reform to lead that office into the future. In the 14 weeks that I've been in office, not only have I secured the trust and support of prosecutors, victim advocates, criminal defense attorneys, Sheriff Kelly, the law enforcement union, the criminal defense bar, and criminal justice